Good morning, everybody. Welcome to JLARC's December 16th meeting. I hope everybody is happy this morning and all ready for the holidays coming up. I know I'm not. So we have a very interesting JLARC agenda today, and stuff that is on everybody's mind when you're in this business for every day. So Hal Greer, our director, you want to open us up here?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Commission. I'm Hal Greer, the Staff Director of JLARC. We have 5 items on this morning's agenda. First, we'll present the findings from our review of the new K-12 accountability system. Also here to address you on this topic is Superintendent Gullickson. Next, Delegate Simon will present the 4 JLARC study resolutions recommended by the Topic Selection Subcommittee for your approval. We'll then present the findings from our review of the community impacts of gun violence. And finally, we'll present the results of the review of the hybrid retirement plan and briefly present our semi-annual VRS oversight report. VRS Director Trish Bishop will also address you regarding the hybrid retirement plan. Please note that in your materials is our annual review of state spending on SOQ, but we'll not be presenting the findings this morning. However, we're happy to answer any questions you have about it.
Do we need to take roll call?
We don't typically.
Okay, I forget. Okay, I'll make a note for the public that we have, participating remotely is Senator Locke, Delegate Herring, and Senator McDougal. Welcome out there in online land. Okay. Would you like to introduce the first subject, which is our new accountability system?
I would, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, our first item on the agenda is the K-12 accountability system. As you'll hear this morning, the Board of Education is developing an accountability system that is a substantial improvement over the prior one, though it does need some key refinements. But more important than an effective accountability system is a school improvement program that can provide needed support to struggling schools that have been identified. The Department of Education has had this responsibility for many years, and JLARC has been evaluating this function for a long time. And unfortunately, the state and DOE have consistently fallen short in delivering a high-quality and effective school improvement program. You will hear this morning that DOE is in the process of designing and redesigning the program, and the new design has considerable promise. However, you'll hear concerns about planning for the new program and the adequacy of the staff resources to effectively serve all the schools who need support. It's important for the state to sustain attention to this critical function and take the steps necessary to ensure that an effective school improvement program is in place to support the state's struggling schools. The students being served by those schools deserve it. I want to thank the chairman of the Board of Education, Grace Creasy, and the rest of the board members who are all generous with their time in discussing the new accountability system. Justin Brown oversaw the review, and Joe McMahon was the project leader. Joe?
Good morning, Joe.
Thank you, Hal. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission.
Good morning to you. Welcome.
Thank you. As Hal mentioned, my name is Joe McMahon. I'm presenting our report on Virginia's new K-12 school accountability system. Working with me on this study were Kate Hopkins, Laura White, and Sam Leisman. And just a note, Kate will be stepping to the podium to give part of this presentation right in the middle. For this study, we were directed to review Virginia's recently revised school accountability system. Our primary research activities are here. I just want to focus on a couple really quickly. We conducted an extensive number of interviews, including over 30 with subject matter experts on the topic of school accountability. We also viewed every state Board of Education meeting where school accountability was discussed over the past 3 years. In summary, we found that the new accountability system is more effective and useful than the state's prior system, but refinements are needed. The system's labels do not clearly communicate performance, nor relate to one another on a continuous scale. The scoring thresholds do not account for differences in how school levels are measured, benefiting high schools. The system weights proficiency more than growth, which captures less of schools' contribution to learning. Scoring used for the 3 E's indicator is problematic, and VDOE is redesigning its school improvement program, but it is too early to determine its effectiveness. I'm going to start off with some background. The school accountability system serves several purposes. It provides stakeholders with information about school quality and student performance. It is meant to hold school leaders accountable and motivate them to improve performance. And it's the tool the state uses for identifying schools and students that need additional support. That support can come in the form of assistance from VDOE staff or in the form of funding, primarily through federal school improvement grants. A school accountability system achieves these goals by quantifying and reporting on school performance. Those results produced by the system are highly visible and have implications for schools, which we'll discuss later in the presentation. The board approved Virginia's new system called the School Performance and Support Framework in 2024. We'll refer to it as the SPSF or the framework. It replaced the state's prior system, which had been in place since 2017. The framework went into effect for the 24-25 school year, and the results for that first year were released 1 week ago today. It measures school performance using student performance across various indicators, which I'll talk more about on the next slide. And finally, the framework produces a publicly available rating for each school. I also want to add, related to the timing of those results, our team worked diligently to update our analysis to the greatest extent possible. The content of the report and this presentation almost entirely reflects the new results that were released publicly last week. Here's a look at what is being measured by the framework. These measures are called indicators, and they vary by school level. For the 24-25 school year, elementary and middle schools are mainly measured on students' proficiency in reading, math, and student proficiency on reading, math, and science SOLs, and student growth as measured in terms of students' current year SOL results compared to prior years. High schools are primarily measured with similar proficiency indicators, as well as a college, career, and military readiness indicator called the 3 E's and 2 graduation rate indicators. The framework is essentially a big math equation. Points are assigned on a per-student basis for each indicator and quantified. Then the weight designated by the framework is applied to each. The product of those is an indicator score. And then all indicator scores are totaled to produce the summative score for each school. Then the framework assigns each school a performance label based on its summative score. In addition, schools with certain levels of low performance can also receive a federal designation based on that score. And we'll have more about the state performance labels and federal designations later in the presentation. The framework is still evolving. Currently, the board is considering several substantive changes to the framework as part of a proposed amendment to the state ESSA plan. 3 of the changes being considered would implement recommendations or a policy option in this report. For several others, we have commentary in the report, but those proposals were made too recently for us to have sufficient detail needed to conduct a full evaluation. Naturally, the results of the SPSF would likely be affected by changes to the system, including many of the proposed changes mentioned on the previous slide. One other thing I want to point out is that the board took recent action to raise cut scores. Cut scores are the numeric score used to delineate performance levels on SOLs. The change to cut scores would result in a decline to overall school ratings once fully implemented, assuming no other changes are made to the framework. I can pause there.
Any questions from the members? Okay.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Next, I'll give our overall assessment of the new system. When evaluating a school accountability system, it's important to keep in mind that because of the complexity of K through 12 education and states' varying priorities, it means there's no single best system. Each system is a balance of policy priorities, stakeholder concerns, and transparency. States are limited to measures where data is produced consistently and reliably statewide, and there are many trade-offs to consider when constructing a system, like which areas of performance to measure, decisions about weighting, measurement, and scoring of each indicator, and striking that balance between simplicity and precision. For our first finding, Virginia's new accountability system is more effective and useful than the prior system. First, the framework better differentiates school performance. This differentiation is important for several reasons, notably for providing more transparency and for incentivizing schools to perform well. You can see here, for the prior system during the 23-24 school year, all schools fell into just 2 performance categories, with most receiving the highest rating. That distribution was not typical with what you see in other states or aligned with best practices. In contrast, the SPSF has 4 performance categories and distributes a meaning number of schools across each one, which is closer to what you see in other states and what experts recommend. The next improvement is that the SPSF is a single system used for state and federal accountability purposes. That means it uses identical indicators, weighting, measurement, and scoring for meeting federal accountability requirements and for producing state ratings. Another improvement is that the framework separates school accreditation from school accountability. Accreditation is a measure of compliance with state requirements related to things like course offerings, staffing ratios, and health and safety standards, whereas accountability is a measure of student and school performance. Subject matter experts and a majority of school divisions viewed these changes positively. The framework is also more precise and inclusive than the prior system. This includes how it uses separate indicators for each type of performance, how it scores many of the indicators, and the minimum number of student threshold that is used as part of calculations and for reporting. Our next finding is that the framework structure is generally sound, but refinements are needed. We found that the SPSF's structural elements, such as indicators, weighting, measurement, and scoring, are generally consistent with federal guidance, expert opinion or recommendations, and other states' accountability systems. Given the overall structure meets that criteria, fundamental changes are not needed. They would be unnecessarily disruptive and would be administratively burdensome to schools. However, that's not to say there isn't room for improvement. We have 11 recommendations and options for making changes to the framework, some of which are pretty substantial. These recommendations are directed at the board, given its supervisory authority in this area. I can pause there as well.
Could you tell us, Joe, how long had the previous 2-factor system been in place? Was it decades?
Since the previous system that this one is, Mr. Chairman, the previous system that this is replacing was in place since 2017.
So not that long. So could you tell us why that was changed in 2017 to be that system, and you know, what was its weaknesses or strengths?
Yep. So, Mr. Chairman, that big change in 2017 came off of, so you started with No Child Left Behind, and then the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, was passed federally, which really expanded school accountability beyond the binary pass-fail proficiency, and required states to include a secondary academic indicator, other measures of school performance.
This new initiative is based on, we need to update our system to be consistent with federal law.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, that was the previous one. So 2017, that's where that update came in. The big change there is they added growth as an indicator in 2017. And then now moving to 2024 with this new change, the board cited needs for increased transparency and higher standards were 2 of the big factors cited for this revamp.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about what was going on before 2017?
Mr. Chair.
We've been around here a long time now.
Yes.
So
Mr. Chair, I'd probably have to get back to you on specifics of that, but I know that one of the big improvements they cited during 2017 was this addition of measuring growth in addition to student proficiency, as well as some of these other school quality and student success indicators like attendance. So it broadened what was being measured.
Okay, terrific. Any other questions here? Delegate Rasul and then Senator McPike.
Thank you. You mentioned the cut scores that were increased. Can you, did JLARC identify any benefit, functional benefit in increasing those cut scores? And then the second question, which will actually be in reference maybe to your next slide, is how significant a change we would anticipate how the schools would fall in those 4 categories based on this kind of new shift in cut scores.
Sure. Delegate Rasul, on that first question, we analyzed the impact that those changes in cut scores would have. We were keeping this study focused on the accountability system itself, so we didn't get into those new cut scores being good or bad, the pros and cons or benefits. As far as your second question, how much that would impact things, I think if I go back to this slide here, our analysis found that the overall score, once the cut scores are fully implemented, schools' average overall score would decline by about 8.5 points. So I put the ranges up here so you could see what that would potentially mean for a school. Say a school scoring rated that distinguished threshold about 90, on average would lose 8.5 or score 8.5 points lower. So moving it down towards the bottom of that on-track category. But again, that's an average across over 1,000 schools, so experience would differ.
Thank you.
Senator Pike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Joe, and to the team. Can you speak to the English language proficiency? One of the areas of concern, certainly for my area, Manassas, probably Harrisonburg, probably spots of others where you have English language learning. This sort of, as I understand it, if you do not have a high degree, your school becomes overweighted, and you have a lot, like there's a reweighting that happens in the ELP factor. That's kind of a big concern for me in terms of how this impacts certain communities. Can you speak more to that and its redistribution in this system?
Yes, Senator McPike, there will be slides later specifically talking about that ELP indicator reweighting. So if you're okay, I'll save that for then. And then on the second piece, I'll flag it when we get there. There's another recommendation to, without getting into tons of details, create a different scoring method for that ELP indicator, which I think would also help a bit.
Okay. Mesa, please continue.
22, please. So moving on to results from the new system. You can see here a majority of schools received an on-track or distinguished label for the 24-25 school year. For the 24-25 school year. When examining those results, we found that the proportion of students in a school that are economically disadvantaged is a characteristic that has the strongest relationship with schools' results. Further, schools with more economically disadvantaged students tend to receive lower overall ratings from the SPSF.
They need a study to find that out.
Now, this isn't unique to Virginia or the SPSF. Accountability system results typically reflect students' demographics, especially economically disadvantaged, because many commonly used indicators like test results are correlated with those factors. There's a lack of consensus among experts about how much results should reflect student demographics. On one side of the argument is that results that strongly reflect student demographics are the product of maintaining the same expectations for all students and can help target support to address disparities. The other side is that results that are overly reflective of student demographics evaluate schools on demographic factors outside of their control rather than on their effectiveness. You can see that relationship here. On the left, as a school's percentage of economically disadvantaged students increases, their average summative score decreases. By another measure, schools receiving the lower performance labels had a higher percentage of economically disadvantaged students on average. And we'll talk about this more in a bit. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Kate for our next section.
Welcome, Ms. Hopkins.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kate Hopkins, an analyst at JLARC. I'm going to walk through the next section of our presentation, which is focused on labeling school performance. To begin, school ratings are highly visible. They're the primary way states communicate accountability results to the public. Many states aggregate their accountability results into a single overall rating. States use various formats for these ratings, such as letter grades, stars, colors, or descriptive labels. School ratings are important because they can have both positive and negative implications, such as shaping public perceptions of schools or affecting school staff morale. Virginia's new accountability system uses 4 descriptive labels to communicate schools' overall performance: distinguished, on track, off track, and needs intensive support. This terminology was selected by the State Board of Education and appears to have been drawn from multiple states' accountability systems rather than modeled after a single system. Research shows it can be difficult to develop descriptive labels that are clear, widely understood, and broadly accepted because different stakeholders interpret terms differently. With that being said, we found that some of the SPSF performance labels do not clearly communicate school performance or function as part of a continuous scale. 3 of the 4 SPSF labels do not clearly communicate school performance. For example, on-track and off-track imply a school's performance trend, like that on-track schools are improving and off-track are declining. However, this might not be the case, which means the labels are not clearly and accurately conveying school performance. The distinguished label also does not clearly communicate school performance because it overstates how well some schools are doing. The term distinguished suggests a school is exceptional across the board when it could be underperforming on some indicators or have weaknesses outside the accountability system. The 4 SPSF labels also do not clearly relate to each other as part of a continuous scale. They are disconnected terms, and there is no intuitive progression through the 4 labels. Because of this, it can be difficult for stakeholders to understand the order of the labels and how they relate to one another. For example, in interviews we heard off-track can be misperceived as being a lower rating than needs intensive support because to some people it sounds more negative. Other descriptive labels, such as those used here in West Virginia that you can see on the slide, follow a more clearly continuous order. This is better because it makes it easier for people to intuitively know where a given label fits amongst the others. For example, people are less likely to think West Virginia's second lowest label, partially meets standard, is a worse rating than its lowest label, does not meet standard. Given that the labels are unclear to some stakeholders, we have a recommendation for the board to develop new terminology for the 4 performance labels. It's worth saying here that it is unlikely any set of accountability ratings will satisfy every stakeholder. However, developing terms that are part of a continuous scale and more clearly and accurately convey school performance could help improve clarity and address concerns. We also found an issue with how the new accountability system assigns the performance labels to schools. The current approach ignores differences in how the 3 school levels are measured, which ends up significantly benefiting high schools. As Joe explained, elementary, middle, and high schools are evaluated using different indicators with different weighting. Despite these differences, the SPSF uses the same scoring thresholds to assign the performance labels for each school level. For example, if a school scores 85 points, that school is labeled on track regardless of if it's an elementary, middle, or high school. This inherently benefits some school levels more than others. You can see this very clearly here in the results from the 2024-25 school year. High schools are significantly more likely than elementary and middle schools to have higher ratings. 2/3 of high schools are distinguished, whereas only 17% of elementary schools and 9% of middle schools are. According to experts, you would expect to see a more similar distribution of the performance labels across high schools as elementary and middle schools. To address this issue, we have a recommendation for the board to develop new scoring thresholds that are unique to each school level and result in a more comparable proportion of elementary, middle, and high schools receiving each label. Mr. Chairman, I can stop here briefly if there are any questions before moving on to the next section.
Could you explain again one more time why a high school would be inherently in this system rated higher than a middle school?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, high schools are more likely to, I guess I should say, some of the indicators that high schools are measured via, like graduation rates, the 3 E's indicator, and high school proficiency, are more likely to be high scoring. So they score highly on those indicators. That translates to an overall high score, and then they receive a higher label.
So it's a different test they're getting, different.
Yeah, different tests and just different metrics like graduation rates.
All right. Anybody online? Senators online, have a question? Okay, please continue.
Okay. Before jumping into our next set of findings, a bit of background information. States are required to use their accountability systems to identify low-performing schools. These schools are given a federal designation, which is essentially another label in addition to their SPSF performance label. There are 3 types of federal designations, which I'll walk through on the next slides. The reason this relates to labeling school performance is if a school receives one of these federal designations, it can affect its performance label in the new accountability system. Our first finding in this section relates to schools designated for comprehensive support and improvement. The SPSF should ensure that comprehensive support and improvement schools receive the lowest state performance label. Comprehensive Support and Improvement, or CSI, is the most serious federal designation. It is primarily given to Title I schools with the lowest overall performance in the state. Despite their low performance, many CSI schools do not receive the lowest performance label, needs intensive support. Instead, they're labeled off track. Experts recommend that CSI schools receive the state's lowest rating. This helps ensure that federal and state labels send a consistent message and that the lowest performing schools are clearly identified and prioritized for support. Therefore, we have a recommendation for the board to amend the state's regulations to ensure all CSI schools are labeled as needs intensive support. This would make CSI schools' performance labels consistent with their federal designation and ensure these schools are prioritized for support as much as possible. We also have a finding related to how schools with the two other federal designations are labeled. The SPSF lowers all targeted support and improvement and additional targeted support and improvement schools' performance labels, which is imprecise and can be overly punitive. The targeted support and improvement and additional targeted support and improvement designations, or TSI and ATSI, indicate that a school has one or more significantly underperforming student subgroups. To reflect this, the SPSF lowers the performance labels of TSI and ATSI schools. The board adopted this approach to make sure that student subgroup performance is explicitly factored into schools' accountability results. Without it, a school's rating could mask a low-performing subgroup. The issue with this is that lowering all TSI and ATSI schools' performance labels is imprecise and overly punitive. The details of this get pretty in the weeds, so I won't go into them here, but the main point is that this policy lacks nuance. To address this, we have a recommendation for the board to change the state's regulations regarding how TSI and ATSI designations affect schools' performance labels. Our recommended changes would maintain the emphasis on student subgroup performance, but better align with the intent of the federal designations and make the policy fairer. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Joe.
Hey, Delegate Ware. That's a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at the recommendation on slide 40 to amend regulations so that any school with the federal CSI designation is labeled with the lowest state performance, it seems at least in tension with what you say on slide 42, that when you lower their rating, you're sending a negative message. Can you clarify what your intent is with these two?
Sure, Delegate Ware. So there's kind of a progression through these three federal designations. CSI is the lowest, ATSI is the next lowest, and then TSI is the highest. And so we think it's appropriate to have CSI schools receive the lowest label, whereas lowering TSI schools is, kind of more punitive than making CSI schools needs intensive support because it's a less serious federal designation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm back for the remainder of our presentation.
Sure.
So I'm now going to talk about the framework's proficiency and growth indicators. Proficiency and growth are based on student performance on SOL tests. Proficiency measures whether students are meeting grade level standards in content areas. Growth is a comparison of a student's current year test performance to that same student's performance in prior years. Proficiency and growth account for 80% of the rating for elementary schools and 70% for middle schools. Two findings here. The framework's proficiency indicators are generally well designed, and the growth indicators are an improvement over the prior system, but still have shortcomings that will likely be changed. As I mentioned, the proficiency indicators are generally well designed. The framework uses standalone indicators for reading, math, and science, and quantifies and reports student and school performance for each. This approach is more transparent than the state's prior system, which combined proficiency and growth into a single indicator. Another positive element is the use of index scoring. With an index, schools receive credit for students who score proficient, but also partial credit for students who score below proficient and extra credit for students scoring advanced. This encourages focus on students at all achievement levels and not just those that are right around the pass-fail line. The SPSF's growth indicators also have some elements that are an improvement over the prior system. Like proficiency, these are standalone indicators instead of being combined. And the framework measures growth for all students, not just those who scored below proficient, as was the case in the prior system. So then I'm going to keep this part at a pretty high level for the sake of time, and there's a bunch more in the report. We found issues with the approach used to score the framework's growth indicator for the 24-25 school year, but the board is likely doing a wholesale change of the growth measure for this current 25-26 school year. So there's much more in the report about the pros and cons of the various models that can be used for measuring student growth. Our next finding is that the framework's much heavier weighting on proficiency over growth does not fully capture schools' contribution to student learning and increases the impact of student demographics on school scores. Both proficiency and growth measure important aspects of student academic achievement. Proficiency measures how students perform against state standards for core skills and knowledge, and will help identify schools with the greatest proportion of students not meeting grade levels or grade level standards. Growth better isolates schools' impact on student performance, encouraging a focus on continuous improvement and identifying schools whose students are not making enough progress from the prior year. The weighting of growth and proficiency is one of the biggest philosophical debates in school accountability. ESSA requires that each of the two indicators receive a substantial weight, but gives states flexibility on how to weight them relative to one another. This figure shows the ratio between proficiency and growth indicator weighting by state. On the left, you have states where the growth indicators combined have more weight than the proficiency indicators combined. On the right, states where proficiency is weighted more than growth, and the two are equally weighted for those states in the middle. You can see the Virginia system has the third highest ratio of proficiency relative to growth nationwide.
So, Joe, you think it's good to be in the middle, to weight them equally, or do you think it's beneficial to be on one side or the other?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to get into that in these next few slides. I think you'll hear there's trade-offs. It's a policy call, but I'm going to talk through some of those trade-offs now.
Okay, thank you.
The board was intentional about this decision to place more emphasis on proficiency, and here's some of the reasons that they cited. They feel that meeting grade level standards is a key outcome for students. They want to maintain the high expectation of proficiency for all students. And they cited hearing from stakeholders such as parents and those in the business and military communities that proficiency is what they care most about. The trade-offs of this weighting decision, though, is that proficiency indicators produce results that are more highly correlated with student demographics, especially economic disadvantage that we discussed before. Whereas, in contrast, student growth results are less correlated with student demographics. A majority of school and division staff, as well as subject matter experts we spoke to, emphasize that growth is a better measure of the extent to which a school's efforts are contributing to or affecting student performance. So there's some of the trade-offs. We have more in the report. Overall, this is a policy decision about which measure you want to prioritize and what elements of student performance you want to try to capture with your system. So we do have a policy option that the board could increase the weight assigned to growth indicators to more fully account for schools' contribution to student learning. Can pause there.
Delegate Rasul.
Just a quick question. So when we look at the three levels, the elementary, middle, and high school, and the chart that you showed very early on showed that there wasn't really a growth factor for high school. How does that factor in when you're comparing? Do other states use it for high school? In other words, are we when we look at just middle and elementary, are we more middle of the road?
Yes. So Delegate Rasool, there's a couple reasons growth is not included on high school. One is purely a logistical reason. To have growth, you need to have an assessment from the previous year and the current year. High school, those end-of-course exams across subject areas, you're not taking one every year. I'm not perfect on the assessment system, but often you're only taking one in high school on any subject level. So just logistically, there's no other high school test to compare it to. Also, there is a school of thought and research shows that growth is more important in those early level grades, and by high school, it's getting to the point where you're kind of running out of time for growth and need to start demonstrating that proficiency, earn those end-of-course credits. So looking at other states, it is not uncommon to see growth higher at the lower school levels and lower or nothing at the high school level. There's a second half of your question.
Well, I think maybe you're answering that at the tail end, that are there other states that do weight growth at a high school level and that were maybe on that chart? And that's more of a technical question, maybe we'll come back to it, but just want to explore that later.
Delegate Rasool, we did a deep dive comparison to 16 other states, and then I'm sure there's stuff on nationwide. I have a spreadsheet that could tell me that I could get back to you.
Okay, Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On slide 52, you said some stakeholders care most about student proficiency, and you gave a little bit of a list. You went kind of quickly over that. Could you tell me who those stakeholders were that you listed as having a high care about student proficiency?
Mm-hmm. So, Delegate Ware, I will say that caveat this with this isn't uniform and perfect across all groups. Not everybody in any one group agrees with one side or the other, but the board and DOE, in reading this report and during the process, they cited parents, the business and military communities as some of the stakeholder groups where they were hearing this from.
So if I could...
No, Delegate Ware.
In other words, the folks, parents, and the business in the community, probably folks who have a big role in funding at the local level, schools have a high interest in that proficiency. So not surprising that we should have that as at least a significant part of the decision making or the measuring stick in that regard. I guess that's a statement rather than a question.
True or false? Okay. Senator Pike, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And then Delegate Will after you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In looking at measures, and maybe it was more of a BOE discussion, but any of these take in consideration the actual physical plant, the capital school building itself, and the state of the school building. Studies show that when you control for the social economic status of kids, and you have a group of kids in a rundown school building versus one that's actually operating and has heat, the scores change drastically. Any of these measures weighting systems based on how they're investing in the capital infrastructure at all?
Senator Rick Pike, short answer on that is no. You can include indicators in a system about pretty much anything that you have reliable statewide data on. So to the extent that the state has data, I know there's a facilities age data set. I mean, that would be a potential possibility. And to be honest, I didn't see that in any other states, but doesn't mean it can't be done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On those entities that are interested in higher proficiencies, any word from institutions of higher learning? I've heard that over the years. I would think they would have an interest in that.
Yeah, Delegate Wilt, that is another one that the board and VDOE has cited that they heard this from about. I didn't include that on my list off the top of my head, but yes, that was one that they cited. I will say this does go both directions. There were listening sessions, and some of the information that DOE reported to their board back in January 2024 from those listening sessions around the states with various stakeholders, including school staff, parents, the public, had more mixed results as well. So again, I just want to emphasize, neither side of this argument is universal for many of these groups.
Are you satisfied, Delegate Wilt? Yeah. Okay, good. Senator Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are we getting any discussions in any of this about the quality of teachers?
Senator Locke, not in today's presentation. I will say we did do analysis of that. It's going to be a deep dive into either Appendix G, I believe it's Appendix G or Appendix H, but we looked at things like out-of-field teachers, teacher vacancies, and fully licensed versus provisionally licensed teachers, and how schools with different levels of those types of teacher workforce challenges score on the framework.
You follow up, Senator Locke?
Not right now, but I think that is critically important to student outcomes.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else here? Okay. Please continue.
Okay, I'm going to work my way through some other key refinements. So first, we found that the scoring used for the framework's college, career, and military readiness indicator, referred to the 3 E's, is problematic. The scoring approach used for the indicator differs from others. For the 3 E's, high schools earn points for student achievement in college, career, and military readiness opportunities, and one student can score points across multiple pathways. You can see the example here of a student with achievements in 3 pathways, scoring 2.5 points total. Moreover, a student could theoretically score a maximum of 3.5 points if they hit that highest level in each category. That's compared to just 1.25 or 1 point as a maximum for other indicators. So this design is intended to incentivize schools to make many 3 E's opportunities available, to make them available to students, and encourage broad participation across each pathway. However, this allows schools to score much higher on the 3 E's, which can distort their overall results. This means that for at least some schools, their overall score is being driven more by the 3 E's than is intended by the indicators being assigned a weight. You can see that the schools with high 3E indicator scores had 34% of their summative score comprised by the indicator, when the intended weight is just 25%. This effectively lessens the importance of the other indicators. Likewise, these high 3 E's scores distort overall results, which can be misleading. Essentially, a higher overall score caused by the 3 E's gives the perception of higher overall performance than is reflected across all of the school's indicators. This is one of the factors contributing to why so many high schools received the distinguished label, as mentioned earlier in the presentation.
Joe, how long have we had this 3E indicator scoring? Is this something that's been around for a long time?
Mr. Chair, that is new with the new system. So this 24-25 school year, and the results reported last week is the first time that has been formally measured.
Is this something that the school board thinks is really the great achievement, a new thing? Is this, okay, I mean, how big a change is this?
The old system did have I'm going to get the acronym right, College Career Readiness Index. It measured many of the same things as the 3 E's, but the 3 E's is a broader scope of things, of student achievements being measured. The big difference being that old one on the old system was a binary. A student gets 1 point if they met any of those, nothing if they met none of them. Okay. This 3 E's is a different model where it's a cumulative addition across pathways.
Okay, is this something that's sought by the higher ed community or the business community? Where's the demand for this?
Yeah, both of those stakeholders were cited in the reasoning for adding this indicator. I mean, it is pretty common. I think it's about 40 or 41 of the 50 states have some kind of college and career readiness indicator. They measure a lot of these same things: AP tests, dual enrollment, work-based learning, CTE credentialing. So it's not that unusual, and it's meant to be a measure of students' readiness for post-high school success.
Okay.
So we have a recommendation that the board change the scoring of the 3 E's indicator by capping the total number of points a student or school can achieve. I'd like to point out that the report provides examples of how these caps could be set in a way to strike a balance between the board's goals of incentivizing student achievement across multiple pathways, while also limiting the indicator's disproportionate impact on school scores. Also, this recommendation in no way means that there should be a limit on the actual number of opportunities made available to students. For the next finding, the framework's rules for reweighting the English language proficiency progress indicator for elementary and middle schools with too few English learners reduces comparability and fairness of results. And this is part of what Senator McPike was touching on before with that question. So the ELP progress indicator is a measure of English learners' progress towards achieving English language proficiency as measured by the WIDA access exam. This indicator is required by ESSA. Why this matters is because 42% of schools have below the 15-student minimum threshold of English learners being measured, which means that the entire indicator is excluded when calculating their overall score. That means the indicator's 10% weight has to be redistributed elsewhere. For high schools, that weight is redistributed proportionally to all of the remaining indicators. However, for elementary schools and middle schools, that weight is entirely redistributed to the growth indicator. That redistribution of the entire 10% weight to growth alters how a substantial proportion of elementary and middle schools are being evaluated when compared to their counterparts with a score for the ELP progress indicator. This reduces comparability of results and has implications for fairness between schools with and without the indicator. So that's part of what Senator McPike asked. There's going to be a little bit more on 2 slides here.
So this weakness is something that everybody recognizes in the new system.
DOE, this specific recommendation I'm talking about, the reweighting, VDOE has indicated after they reviewed the draft of this report that is something that they plan on changing.
Okay, good. Any questions? Thank you.
So we have a recommendation to change to proportional weighting for all school levels. And then finally, we've identified several additional refinements to help strengthen the framework that are covered in the report and just listed at a high level here for the sake of time. These include changes to the proficiency scoring index for assessments with 3 performance levels, changes to how points are awarded for the enlistment category of the 3 E's indicator, a change to the exception or rules for how long recently arrived English learners' test scores are excluded from proficiency and growth calculations, and establishing a scoring index for the ELP progress indicator. Senator McPike, to your earlier question, that scoring index, that's where students achieving below the target would get partial credit, students scoring above their target would get additional credit. And effectively what's going on now is the ELP progress indicator is a binary pass or fail. And because of that, behind the scenes math, you just end up scoring lower on that indicator on average. So schools with the indicator have a little bit of a drag from a lower score there compared to schools without. If you put that index in place, it would, and we're not recommending this to improve scores on that indicator. We're recommending it because we think it's a best practice and it aligns with the proficiency indicator. But a secondary benefit would be to take some of the disparity out. And then I just want to point out the first 3 changes listed on that slide are something the board is currently considering doing as part of the amendment to the state's ESSA plan. I can pause there before our final section. Okay, moving to the school improvement program. As Hal mentioned before, a key purpose of accountability is to identify schools that need improvement and provide support. One of the primary ways this occurs is through the school improvement services that VDOE staff deliver to schools identified as being low performing. This work includes providing training and technical support to schools, preparing materials, and sharing best practices, as well as distributing federal school improvement grants and other federal and state funds that can be used for improvement efforts. The SPSF results in 434 schools receiving a federal designation for low performance and another 191 schools receiving an off-track label but no federal designation. We have 3 findings. The first is that VDOE is redesigning its school improvement program, and that redesign appears to be an improvement over prior approaches used by the agency. That a lack of a consolidated written plan for the program, as well as staffing workloads, may hinder its implementation, and a full evaluation of the school improvement program cannot occur until services have been provided. So just a brief history here. A 2020 JLARC evaluation found problems with VDOE school improvement services. Since then, changes in agency leadership and philosophy have stagnated efforts to improve its effectiveness. To its credit, current VDOE leadership has prioritized redesigning the agency's school improvement program. And what we know about that redesign is positive, and it appears to be an improvement over prior approaches. Some of the highlights are tailored support that will be delivered by subject matter specialists throughout the agency, and prioritizing low-performing schools for existing state grants. However, we identified some areas of concern that may hinder implementation of the school improvement program. First, there's not a consolidated written plan for this large-scale, complex redesign. There are resources online, information has been presented to the board, and recently a timeline has been posted on the VDOE website, but there's not been a development of a formal consolidated plan that brings that all together. A second thing is that the new school improvement program's emphasis on tailored support will be labor-intensive and may be difficult to effectively execute with planned staff. So that's our overview at this point. However, it's too early to truly evaluate the effectiveness of the school improvement program. VDOE has only recently begun to provide support services under the new effort and related to the new model, and we're talking within the past few weeks. And you can see here what we think an evaluation of a full evaluation of the program's effectiveness should entail once some time has passed. So looking towards next step, first, as I mentioned a few slides back, is that detailed plan. But in addition to that, providing improvement services to lower performing schools is a critical state responsibility, and it's one that requires sustained attention and effort for success. So this includes necessary and sustained attention from future superintendents of public instruction and regular monitoring, particularly by the board, to ensure the effectiveness of agencies' efforts. So we have several recommendations. First is to require VDOE to develop and submit a one-time detailed plan, as well as annually develop status updates. The next two would be to formally establish in code the responsibilities of the superintendent of public instruction and the State Board of Education to effectively implement and oversee the school improvement program. And finally, we have a recommendation for the board to contract for an independent evaluation of the school improvement program after it has been implemented. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any additional questions.
So Joe, what kind of feedback have you received from the school divisions on this? What kind, did you vet this with school systems around the state?
Mr. Chair, we talked to them generally about school improvement. We talked to them about the prior system. This new one is very newly developed. It is just being implemented in the first few divisions within the past few weeks. To be honest, I'm not sure, if we talked to them within the last few weeks, I'm not sure they would have much insight into how this is going to go beyond, here's what we hear is going to happen, and here's what we think about that.
So we can expect to hear from them about this, maybe. So how would you recommend funding this, given our current system of funding K-12? So we're going to have a school improvement program implemented at the state level. Mm-hmm. That's the first. I know we've done interventions in the past. This is not my subject area, but we have done interventions, I know. So how is this different? How would it be paid for? Is there a new account that you're recommending that we fund?
Mr. Chair, I don't want to step on you all's toes about funding decisions. I can just talk generally.
Feel free. I mean,
we did that big SOQ funding study a few years ago that talks about bigger wholesale changes to the system to potentially target some of this.
Study, yeah.
Also, you can have a separate pot of money that goes directly to these schools. You can fund agency staff, expand that staffing to have VDOE staff provide some of these services. There's several different ways to do it.
So our current system would not really fit with these recommendations?
I think the current system, I think, would fit with these recommendations, in that just establishing this as a clear, well-defined responsibility of the agency and the board to get right, establishing that plan so then there's something tangible that we can point to say this is how many staff will be doing things, this is how many grants we are giving out or we think should be given out, and that could give you some idea on where to put the funding or how much.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just
yes. Mr. Brown.
A little bit high level, thank you. I think we really believe, given our history of looking at this program, that if the state is going to be in this business and try to do this, it needs to do it well. I think when we've looked at it before, it's been described as kind of a paperwork exercise or a drill that doesn't really result in improvement. And I think that this current redesign has the potential to be better. But until there really is a clear plan, like we're talking about needing to be developed, it's difficult to know how much it needs to be resourced. But I think it's something that could result in more resources being needed. And I think we believe this function is important enough that it should be resourced to the extent that it can be within the constraints of revenue. So I think that's why that plan is pretty important in terms of what they think needs to be done and what they are going to do.
Okay. So you would envision this like every year there'd be a plan and the administration would put in a budget funding to implement that plan.
I think that's correct. I think it needs to be, I think it's important enough, it needs to be big enough that it certainly could be something in the budget that is receives specific resources. And there has been resources provided historically, but the last 3 or 4 years there's been a lot of back and forth between the administration and the legislature, frankly, about where the funds should go and how much funding should be provided. And part of that was just the changing description of what the services were going to be. So, but once there's a clear understanding of what will be provided and what it will take, I think it needs sustained financial attention moving forward as well.
Okay. Members? Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have one follow-up, and it's to the earlier presentation about the 2 lowest federal ratings. It was indicated earlier that the second lowest was sort of masked into the rating system, only designated lower. Can you get back into it in terms of how they align or don't align with how the state's currently tracking?
Sure. Senator McPike, I'm not sure I understand your question exactly about the masking. I will say, so there's, TSI is it's a serious designation, but it's less serious than ATSI and less serious than CSI. And so right now, with the way the rules are written, more TSI schools are actually labeled needs intensive support because the TSI designation lowers their performance label. So they score as off track, but they're also TSI. So they're getting labeled to lowered to needs intensive support. CSI schools, a lot of them score off track. There's no rule saying that their label needs to be lowered. There's no rule right now saying that their label should be needs intensive support, so they stay off track. So there's an imbalance there. CSI is a more serious designation. You'd think those schools would have a lower label. Right now, actually, TSI schools are more likely to have a lower label.
Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And is there an implication to federal support funding-wise in doing so?
Senator McPike, TSI schools, ATSI and CSI schools all are eligible for school improvement grants. CSI schools in VDOE's new process for providing support get higher priority for those grants. So yeah, there would be implications there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Delegate Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Joe, for the presentation here. Just a couple of questions, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Simplification, clarification for me. What does your research say about what would make a difference for the schools and students that are struggling the most? In other words, what would it take to help the schools identified as struggling to become successful? First question. And then the second one, how does the framework account for schools that have demonstrated strong recent growth but may be struggling on proficiency metrics because they serve a high portion of students in poverty who start with big deficits?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Delegate Card, for that first one, there's many factors that contribute to student success and outcomes. Some are that we've seen in our past studies. Teacher workforce and teacher quality, as Senator Lucas mentioned that question. Bring it back to the accountability system, which is primarily what we are looking at. This system, too, is going to produce a lot of data by student subgroup for each of these indicators individually. So I'm not just saying that you can actually use the results and the data from this system to identify which student groups or pockets within a school are performing lower and where that performance which areas that performance is in and target that with whatever reading coaches, an attendance program, engagement programs to try to help with graduation rates. So I think keeping it focused on the system, that's where it's useful there. As far as your other question on that strong growth versus proficiency piece, I think there's a few parts there. One would be that policy option on just the simplest way is increasing the weight on growth. So it has a weight, I don't want to get into exactly what it should be, but something closer to proficiency that would better account for those students' growth. Another thing that we didn't touch on here, we have some in one of the appendix of our report, is just how you report the results. There's a lot of ways to do that. You can show by each individual indicator so people can see that this is a school that's growing that may not be that much on proficiency. You can add trend lines, arrows. So there's ways you can present this information to give a more holistic picture.
Thank you. If you don't have any summary remarks, we'll move to the superintendent who's going to respond to this.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Report. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Superintendent Gullickson, come on down and welcome.
Great, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to engage on the first year results of the new school performance and support framework. First, I would like to extend my appreciation to the staff at JLARC with special recognition to Director Greer, Senior Associate Director Brown, Senior Legislative Analyst Hopkins, and Chief Legislative Analyst McMahon, as well as the other leads who have been engaged on this K-12 accountability project for the last year, including before my tenure at the department. The team has been very thorough, data-driven, and as you heard previously, outlined feedback to further strengthen the system, so thank you for your diligent work. The results that were released by the Virginia Department of Education last week are the first assessment since the Virginia Board of Education approved a new way of measuring school performance last year. And this change was critical, for under the previous system, growth completely masked achievement realities and thus limited our ability to really deliver the right supports to meet individual students' needs. As the Washington Post clearly captured this weekend, the system now gives schools two ratings, one for accreditation that is based on simple criteria such as whether the school meets staffing requirements, building codes, and others, as you heard previously, and another for accountability that uses test scores and other metrics to determine a performance score. The accountability system, or school performance and support framework, as you heard, is providing a clear way to understand how well our schools are supporting student learning, academic growth, and readiness for life after high school. Now, this approach is shifting our accountability toward actionable support and clear reporting, making these strengths more visible, identifying where students and schools need additional help, and spotlighting successful practices that can now be replicated statewide. First, it has been building trust by offering actionable, easy to understand information about school performance and student success. This data is available directly to parents and provides clear, unified picture of how well schools are fulfilling their responsibility to ensure that students learn or exceed grade level content, grow academically year over year, and graduate prepared for life after high school. One of the highlights of my week has been receiving responses by individual principals and superintendents about the department's recognition and appreciation for their leadership of distinguished schools, not only the work that's been done, but how to further illustrate what's working to their peers. With 1 in 4 public schools earning a distinguished recognition, we can see that excellence is found in all 8 of the superintendent's regions. Again and again, leaders shared that this distinguished recognition was a testament to the incredible dedication and hard work of their entire school community and how immensely proud they were of this accomplishment, for it's validating their collective efforts to provide an exceptional learning environment and drive continuous improvement. We've heard from assistant principals, and superintendents on how useful these regional snapshots are that are also now on our website, lifting up exemplar models for individual indicators, as well as collective achievement within communities. These new regional snapshots are helping for even distinguished schools to be able to continue to refine their learning models and make it easier for leaders and teams of teachers to see proven practices at work, not only in their superintendent regions, but neighboring regions as well. Our goal at the department with new offices such as the excellence and best practices is to more easily identify what is working and effective proven practices to be easily replicated by the field. The framework is one way to see success in instruction and preparing students to graduate in communities across the Commonwealth. Next, as you heard, the new School Performance and Support Framework measures learning outcomes that matter the most to lifelong progress and success, such as literacy, math proficiency, and post-high school readiness, as well as whether schools are offering relevant experiences to prepare our graduates for work, military service, and the ongoing education and training that's required to succeed in today's economy. The 3E readiness component of the framework aligns with demands from parents and students alike for more relevant and engaging high school experiences by providing this roadmap to schools on how to deliver critical experiences and courses to improve preparedness. The 3E readiness component has been embraced by divisions and students and is an important modernization of our accountability system. Now, we heard from JLARC staff, one of the recommendations is to do further refinement on military readiness as a component in the 3E readiness indicator. And both we at the department and the board are in full support and aligned on those next steps. We know that for post-secondary readiness to translate after graduation, the 3E design must be appropriately rigorous, and we appreciate your partnership to ensure that this new tool meets its full potential. In addition to recognizing excellence, the framework has clearly signaled to policymakers, local governing boards, and the department's subject matter experts where additional help is needed to improve outcomes. Most importantly, this framework is seeing every student. Student groups as small as 15 are included in the School Performance and Support Framework. This ensures that more students are visible, allowing us to identify bright spots to scale and direct support where it is needed most. For when we cannot see every student, we cannot support every student. With this modernized, comprehensive approach to accountability, the department tasked with supporting schools cannot remain static, and it must evolve as well. So since arriving at the department in March, our department has executed a significant organizational redesign to improve coherence, collaboration, and operational effectiveness. These changes were informed by research and best practices and have better positioned the department's subject matter experts to serve schools and divisions in alignment with requirements defined in the School Performance and Support Framework. The department has both recruited high-caliber national talent and promoted exemplar staff into leadership roles to expand our organizational capacity. This positions the department moving forward to meet the needs of students across the Commonwealth with greater precision and expertise. Ultimately, what the community of parents, educators, business leaders, and higher ed professionals gave us in this framework is an interconnected set of measures and outcomes that define what a modern system of education should look like and how it should perform. I believe that Virginia has built a model to propel our students, educators, and schools into this next era of academic achievement and readiness. And with that, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to speak and cede my time.
Thank you. Thank you for coming today. Is there anything in this report that you just think is flat out wrong?
Well, I do have some concerns on the heavy focus on proficiency versus growth. One of the areas that we have heard loudly from parents is that we want every child to be prepared. And we had some fun conversations with the JLARC team on why this is so crucial. It's a yes and moment. We want to make sure that students are making annual progress, that they are moving, and that students are getting towards grade level or exceeding the grade level. That includes our advanced students, who are now a focal point within the framework. But growth cannot be more important than ensuring that students are truly prepared on the grade level content and are able to succeed and prosper upon graduation. We want that diploma to mean even more.
So why wouldn't it be good to have equal emphasis on both instead of putting the weight on one side or the other side of this issue.
One of the areas that you can see in the inaugural results here is that our prioritization and focal point right now is especially on elementary schools. That is where additional support is needed. We know that we've made momentous progress with efforts with bipartisan support around items like the Virginia Literacy Act and the huge lift by the field, our reading coaches, and instructors on the ground on moving the needle on reading. Math is now a major focus point. And so when you blur the lines on growth and readiness, then we can't really deliver and focus on where students are not yet on grade level and need those additional supports.
So blurring the line, I don't really know what that would mean. I mean, if I was going to be a teacher being recruited into a very difficult situation, and growth wasn't part of my evaluation, or maybe the majority of it, that would be a disincentive for me to go, because you have the challenge of taking a group of kids from 30 kids at a time, unfortunately, many times, to another level. And if they're successful at that, in elementary school in particular, isn't that a great achievement? Isn't that what we want the most, is to move a group of children the furthest in these early ages, in early grades?
Mr. Chairman, yes, which is also why the General Assembly's focus on our early childhood system is also critical for preparedness, right? The focus on Virginia's kindergarten readiness program and all the investments we've made on early learning ensure that more of our students, especially from our highest economically disadvantaged households, are ready by the time they get to kindergarten and have less of those gaps
We all agree with that. Yeah, we all agree with that.
And
Chamber of
so,
Commerce, everybody.
yes, but growth matters, but we also want to make sure that our students are learning in those most formative years to build those skills in math and reading that then can transpire into those middle school and high school years.
Okay, well, it's hard to argue with that. I don't know, this is new to me, but blurring the two, we need both of them, right? And it is interesting that once you get to high school, our schools have better grades. I mean, these are the same kids going up through a pyramid, and they're in schools that are not rated as highly, and they get to high school, and all of a sudden their school is distinguished. Isn't that the situation now with this new ranking system?
I think if you talk to your high school principals and your system leaders, they've done an exceptional job on prioritizing their role at the high school level, which is readiness for life after high school. We see that not only are students participating in more of these advanced opportunities, but they are actually earning industry-recognized credentials, earning college credit, earning associate's degrees, earning those skills needed to be successful. And that's a shift.
Okay. Anybody else? Delegate Wilt, and then Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just make a very brief comment. I appreciate your position. I get on an airplane, I want my pilot to not be just doing better. I want them to know what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't think that's really relevant to this, but we all want people to be proficient. That's not. I'm trying to figure out, Delegate Wilt, this blurring business, this spectrum of where you go from focusing on growth to focusing on proficiency, and the need for both. And I think that a pilot needs to grow to get to the point where he or she is proficient. So anyway, Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time of presentation. And we received your letter included in a report as one of the appendix, as well as the President of the Board of Education. And both those letters indicate that you do not support any changes to the 3E readiness measure, which today we went through, that sort of says it's overweighted, roughly 34%, once you look at how that metrics is added up and basis to the others. that is a position that you're maintaining after hearing today's presentation?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, one of the things that the board has been adamant on is not putting a ceiling on students. We think it's fantastic that schools are providing more opportunities and focused on ensuring that students are not on a particular track, as historically was the focal point. There are certainly ways that we can be more transparent about denominators on making sure that we can show the impact on a school, that a certain cluster of students are not the only ones earning those higher weights. But we feel strongly about making sure that schools are not penalized for going above and beyond to support students pursuing opportunities to show military preparedness as well as college and career readiness.
Any follow-up question, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman?
sir.
Thank you. Both of those letters also did not cite anything in the report in regards to the ELP measures and the issues that we went through today, which have significant disparate impacts on communities across Virginia. Why no response to that issue?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Senator, the board has been taking public input and looking at that as part of the next Every Student Succeeds Act amendment for the federal government and our state plan. And so since there were a few items that were captured as recommendations today that are already a focal point for the board with input from the field, we did not choose to address those head on.
Okay. Anybody else? Delegate Ware, and then I have a final question, unless somebody else wants to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having watched this from close up, but 30 years ago I was on the State Board of Education, and we were talking about moving standards of learning from exhortations to regulations. And the same challenges occurred at that point, or similar challenges occurred at that point, along with how does the state assist schools that are not meeting those challenges. This is obviously a very much more sophisticated analysis, which is in the nature of it over time. I do think it's important that we continue to focus on mastery. That is where parents and business leaders, community folks are interested, and there are sad tales. I think there's been a story around the University of California, San Diego, about kids getting in the math classes that don't have, they're not at middle school and they're in college math classes. So I do think the focus on proficiency has to continue to be there. There can be recalibrations. You've indicated this is the first year. And I think those recalibrations will continue, and I look forward to that, because ultimately it's the students that we have in focus. This is why schools exist, and this is why we need to be focused on accountability and ensuring that they get what we are promising to deliver.
Yes, to know that we're getting our money's worth for our taxpayer dollars, it'd be good to know if at the beginning of the year you can't do algebra, and at the end of the year you can do algebra. And so that would be a measure of growth to me that would show that we're getting our money's worth in valuable teachers and everything. But my question's, my last question, practical. How does the new mechanism, how are we going to fund this new program? What new mechanisms, what's going to be in the budget tomorrow? How are we going to put this into place?
Mr. Chair, you know I cannot speak to the governor's
We'll just
budget
talk about,
release.
you don't have to talk about the amount, just the mechanics. What are the new mechanics? Given the system, the way we fund K-12 now, what are the new mechanics to make this happen?
So in the short term, the agency has overhauled all federal and state grants to ensure that we are prioritizing the schools that need the most support. You will see that in every evaluation matrix and all applications. We think that's critically important.
So it's a grant-based program.
That's how it has been done to date. If you want my own opinion on where the long-term support is for this, in addition to what you heard from JLARC, is that One of JLARC's recommendations from the 2022 report was moving the K-12 funding formula into a weighted student funding formula. If you very much want to ensure that dollars follow students and prioritize students where those needs are, then that is the next shift. That is a multi-year endeavor. The General Assembly and the governor have made great progress on weighting students around students with disabilities, at-risk youth, and English learners, and there's more progress to be done.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Appreciate all your work in helping JLARC come to these conclusions. Now we're going to move to next year's agenda, and I'm going to call on Delegate Simon as our study subcommittee chair to present.
Mr. Chair, is it okay if I present from my seat right here? You want me up at the dais, or is it okay to present?
You know, it's up to you, sir.
All right, I'll stay here in my chair. Okay. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, the study subcommittee met on October 6th and then again on November 10th to review and refine some proposed study topics for JLARC's upcoming work plan. Following those meetings, the subcommittee unanimously recommends adoption of the 4 study resolutions that are in your packet. And since we're running a little behind schedule, I'm not going to read these to you all. But we have one that has to do with agricultural best management practices and a cost share program, one that has to do with artificial intelligence in the Commonwealth and how it's currently used and governed, one on in-home and residential congregate care services for aging Virginians, and another that has to do with the Medicaid and Children's Health Insurance Programs managed care oversight. So again, Mr. Chairman, these were the unanimous recommendations of the study subcommittee, which met twice to talk about it. And Mr. Chairman, I would move that the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission adopt the study resolutions as presented, consistent with the unanimous recommendation of the study subcommittee, and direct JLARC staff to proceed accordingly.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion on the motion? And this can be a voice vote, I assume. So all in favor of the agenda for next year, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Thank you, Senator McDougall. Welcome.
Can I make a quick clarification?
Certainly.
I believe the rules are if a member is going to vote, if they're virtual, their camera needs to be on, but they can vote. So I apologize for that. But slight change and maybe.
There he is.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Okay, I think it's unanimous now. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the work. Thank you, Delegate Simon. And so now we're going to move on to our next presentation on gun violence. And Tracy Smith led this effort. Welcome back, Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Mr.
Mark.
Chairman, members of the commission. Up next is Mark Gribben, and he respectfully, Mr. Chairman, is the brave soul who led this effort, not myself, but hopefully I helped a little bit. Mark led our study on the effects of community gun violence in Virginia. And Mr. Chairman, I have to say that this is one of the more sobering topics that we have undertaken in recent memory. This is a study that was directed through a House Joint Resolution in 2024 that was patroned by Delegate Anthony. I think she was here at one point, but may have had to step out. We appreciate her interest in the topic and hope to have conversations with her if she's interested following the presentation or later on this year. To conduct the study, Mark and his team conducted extensive interviews with many, many local stakeholders. The team also worked with experts at VDH, State Police, the Attorney General's Office, and the Department of Criminal Justice Services. And we're very grateful for the time that all of those many stakeholders spent with us. And I would like to give a special thank you to Laurel Marks at DCJS and her staff in the Office of Safer Communities at DCJS. They were a tremendous help to Mark and his team. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to Mark Gribben.
Welcome, Mark.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission.
Good morning.
I'd also like to acknowledge the main study team. We have Dylan Wild at the table and Brittany Utz in the audience, who are vital to our efforts.
Yeah, unfortunately, because due to myself, we're 32 minutes behind schedule. So if you can make up for our failures, that'd be great.
So you all are familiar with our study resolution, so I'll skip past that. I do want to emphasize Tracy's thanks to the many people who helped us in putting this study together. In brief, we found that Virginia's gun violence rates are similar to national averages, and rates have been declining since 2022. However, 9 Virginia localities have higher rates and account for over half of the state's gun-related homicides. In terms of health effects, we found that firearm injuries tend to be more lethal, severe, and costly to treat than other assault injuries. Gun violence also elevates the risk of psychiatric disorders in survivors and developmental challenges in exposed youth. And Virginia's highest gun violence areas also have shortages of mental health professionals. Focusing in on community violence, we found that it negatively affects local economies, including business activity and property values. It also creates additional challenges for schools, including low student attendance, poor classroom engagement, and staffing challenges. Looking at how to address community gun violence, we found that there are evidence-based programs to prevent, intervene in, and respond to it, many of which are already operating or being established in Virginia localities. However, these programs have limited capacity and may not reach all individuals who could benefit. Finally, the state has increased funding and technical assistance to help localities. Some localities receive less than others. So why is gun violence a concern? Guns are used in a high proportion of violent crimes, including 81% of murders, 43% of robberies, and 40% of assaults. While the portion of robberies involving guns has actually declined, the proportion of gun-related murders and assaults has increased over the past 15 years. Gun-related injuries are a leading cause of death among the state's young people, accounting for 29% of deaths among youth aged 10 to 24 and 15% of young adults aged 25 to 34. If you drill down into gun-related homicides, those alone were the second and third leading causes of death among these groups. And within these age groups, gun-related homicides accounted for an especially high percentage of deaths for Black male youth, where they were almost half of deaths, and Black male young adults, where they were a quarter of deaths. To put current levels of gun violence in historical perspective, violent crime in Virginia peaked back in the 1990s and then reached modern lows in the early 2010s. As you can see here, gun-related violent crime has been inching upward since around 2013 before surging during the COVID-19 pandemic. It has dropped off since 2022, and we expect to see it drop a little further in 2025. These trends are not unique to Virginia and reflect what has been seen nationwide. Comparing to Virginia to the rest of the country, we're in the middle. You can see these are the states with the lowest rates here, and here's the states in the middle, including Virginia. We're about at the halfway point. Then you can see the states that have the highest rates. Although Virginia is in the middle of nationwide, gun-related homicide rates in 9 cities are relatively high, and you can see them here ordered by rate. These 9 localities accounted for over half of gun-related homicides in the state, and for that reason, they were the focus of our study. While gun violence in these cities was higher than the rest of the state, it's important to keep in mind that violence has been declining in most cities since that 2022 peak, and you can see the decline in the far right column. Also to keep in mind is that even though the rates are high in these cities, these are smaller cities, so the scale of violence that you see isn't the same as you see in big cities in other states. None of that is to minimize the loss of life that's happening, just to provide some additional context. Looking at those 9 localities, the main driver of gun violence appears to be community violence, and this was the focus of our research. Community violence is interpersonal violence that often takes place in public spaces. Looking at those 9 localities, we found that 65% of gun homicides took place in public areas compared to 38% in the rest of the state. Community violence is especially concerning because of how it puts the broader community at risk. For example, when there's a shooting in the street or someone shoots up a house, that can scare everyone in the neighborhood because anyone could be hit. In some neighborhoods, shootings happen frequently, and we found many examples of community violence causing death or injury to innocent bystanders who had nothing to do with an incident. Stakeholders indicated that firearms were also easily obtainable in high-violence neighborhoods, including for young people. In talking with law enforcement and others, we heard over and over that most of the gun violence they see results from interpersonal disputes. That could be 2 acquaintances or even strangers getting in an argument and someone pulls a gun, suddenly escalating that situation to violence. It can also be the result of a simmering grudge between 2 individuals or groups. Social media can contribute to that by both perpetuating disputes with the parties involved trading insults online until someone feels they have to, quote-unquote, settle it. The data backs that up. We found that arguments or fights were the most common circumstance listed for gun homicides, accounting for at least 1/3 of incidents, but probably more. The next biggest circumstance for community violence was involvement in criminal activity, most often drug dealing or drug use. That was at least a quarter of gun-related homicides, and a smaller portion of those crime-related incidents were also coded as gang-related. Virginia, of course, has established laws to regulate the legal sale, ownership, and carrying of firearms, and those laws must be consistent with federal constitutional Second Amendment rights. Our study was focused on the effects of community violence and ways to address it, and there's not much national research on that particular topic. Most of the research looks at the broader effects that laws can have, and the best and most objective resource we found was from RAND. According to the RAND research, child access prevention laws and required dealer background checks have the strongest evidence for reducing gun homicides in general, and those laws are in place in Virginia. RAND's research also looked at some common laws that aren't in place in Virginia and found evidence they reduce gun homicides in particular was not as strong, such as waiting periods, or I know firearm purchaser laws are up for discussion right now. That doesn't necessarily mean they have no effect on homicides, just that more research is needed to find if there is a relationship there. And I will note that RAND does find that there are other outcomes that could be affected that weren't the focus of our study, so things like suicides or mass shootings, firearm trafficking. Mr. Chair, I'll pause on that non-controversial slide for you.
Okay. Delegate Simon, this is your area of expertise. Do you have any questions?
So you guys didn't do your own sort of research on the effectiveness of Virginia's gun laws. You relied on RAND's study, and just you guys didn't do any independent research on those particular topics. Is that right?
Delegate, that's right. So when you look at these studies, they're looking at how a law changes in a state or in a locality and what those effects are. And RAND is actually looking through thousands of studies that have been done over the past several decades and compiling that research. And we looked at the work they were doing, and we thought, well, these guys are doing as good of a job as we could ever hope to do.
Okay, Senator McDougal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, back on slide 11, those 9 jurisdictions, are each of those 9 jurisdictions in the ceasefire program that would coalesce with these reduction rates?
Senator McDougal, if you're referring to the Attorney General's Virginia ceasefire program?
Yes.
Those are all programs that the Attorney General has included under their Virginia ceasefire banner. I will note that there is a separate program that I talk about later called Operation Ceasefire, which is an actual funding program, and they're different things and they don't necessarily overlap.
Mr. Chairman, my question was each of the 9 jurisdictions where, and for I guess it looks like 7 of the 9, the rates went down. That each of those 9 jurisdictions are jurisdictions that are covered under that program.
Senator, yes, I would say I would be careful in thinking about what Virginia ceasefire is. It seems to be more of a packaging around all the efforts that are happening, both at the state level as well as the local level. And most of the work that is being done to reduce gun violence is happening at that local level through city departments, nonprofits, and hospitals.
Follow up. Okay, thank you. Let's keep going.
Next, we'll look at how gun violence affects victims, families, and community members. Our first finding is that firearm injuries tend to be more lethal, severe, and costly to treat than other assault injuries. To that first point, firearm injuries are associated with higher fatality rates than other injuries. For example, data shows 15% fatality rates for firearm assault injuries compared to 1% for stabbings and less than 0.1% for blunt object or bodily force assaults. Looking at non-fatal injuries, firearm injuries were typically more severe. For example, data show 28% of injuries treated in hospitals were coded severe critical compared to 5% for other penetrating injuries and 10% for blunt trauma. On the treatment side, treatment is more complex and costly. For example, 39% of Virginia firearm injury patients required hospitalization. That's because they more often require intensive procedures like resuscitation, blood transfusions, and surgeries. Because they are more complex to treat, they also tend to be more costly, and you can see the scale there. Looking at the subset of patients that we have claims data on, we estimated around 80% of initial treatment costs were paid by Medicaid. However, those costs add up to less than 0.05% of Medicaid expenditures. Many survivors of firearm injuries require additional long-term care. About 1/3 of them do. Keep in mind that some of these folks are suffering injuries that are that are lifelong conditions, such as loss of mobility or cognitive injuries. And so some of these, while they're in care afterwards, it may be an ongoing thing that they deal with for the rest of their life. Our next finding is that survivors and others exposed to gun violence often experience negative mental health impacts, and youth are especially at risk. Being shot or having a loved one shot is a traumatic event that can have negative mental health impacts. Clinical research finds that survivors of gunshot wounds are at increased risk of developing conditions like PTSD, anxiety, and depression. We heard accounts of survivors who were afraid to go outside or stay in the city after they were shot because they knew their shooters were still out there. Family members and others who care for survivors were also affected, showing 20 to 40% showing symptoms of depression and PTSD. We heard accounts of mothers reenacting last phone calls or crying in their cars every night before going home to their families. Routine exposure to gun violence is especially detrimental to young people. Beyond those directly affected, routine exposure to gun violence in a community can affect the mental health of all residents. Keep in mind that in some neighborhoods, shootings happen very frequently. Research finds that residents of these communities report greater rates of social isolation, loneliness, and worse quality of life. We heard accounts from Virginia communities where residents won't let children play outside and are less likely to go out themselves. While these communities often have a greater need for mental health services, they're often in localities with a shortage of mental health professionals. Routine exposure to gun violence is especially detrimental for young people whose brains are still developing. Research finds that exposure puts them at risk of several developmental challenges and mental health disorders. Community workers in Virginia report that the young people they work with are often desensitized to violence, which contributes to a number of problematic behaviors. We have a pretty telling quote there at the bottom from one community worker about the young people that they work with. Mr. Chair, I'll pause there again.
I don't see any hands up.
Then we'll get into the economic effects and effects on schools.
Thank you.
First, we found that gun violence negatively affects business activity and property values. On that first point, the businesses that are most likely to be affected by gun violence are those that rely on walk-in customer traffic, like shops and restaurants, or that lease out space, like commercial office. That's because people generally avoid areas that they perceive as unsafe. We talked with a number of Virginia business owners who provided examples of closing early out of concern for staff and customer safety, or who saw their business drop off because their area gained a reputation for being unsafe. That has ramifications for the locality as a whole because it can push commercial activity outside the city to the surrounding localities. The research backs up what we heard from business owners. Studies found increases in gunshots and violent crime are associated with fewer customer visits, fewer new business openings, downsizing or loss of existing business, and higher operating costs. Violent crimes and shootings are also associated with reduced residential and commercial real estate values. This also has implications for local governments who rely on real estate taxes for a significant portion of their revenues. Looking at schools, we found that community gun violence also creates additional challenges. Foremost, it's associated with negative effects on student safety and learning. Schools in the 9 higher gun violence localities have higher chronic absentee rates, and students are more likely to report feeling unsafe traveling to school and while on school property. Students exposed to violence can struggle with processing the trauma they've experienced, which affects their ability to learn and can manifest in behavior problems. Research finds that this translates into worse outcomes where exposure to violence is associated with lower test scores, increased grade repetition, and decreased graduation rates. Community violence also places additional stress on teachers and staff. For example, it can be hard to work with traumatized students, and if a student is shot, that can affect all the students in the classroom as well as the teacher if they know the student. Teachers in these 9 higher gun violence localities are twice as likely to report safety concerns as well. Those were less about students bringing guns into school than about students who may be getting into fights or showing aggressive behaviors because of events that are happening out in the community. Those outcomes could be contributing to other recruitment and retention challenges that these divisions already face. Schools are doing a number of things to ensure safety and help students and staff. Those include physical school building security measures and added security staff, and we provide a lot more detail on these efforts in our report.
Okay, anybody have a question here? Okay, let's keep moving. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next, we'll look at the strategies used to being addressed community violence. Our research found that effectively addressing gun violence requires a programmatic approach, and programs fall into 4 categories. Starting there from your left are the prevention programs. These reduce the risk of future violence in the long term by addressing the underlying risk factors that contribute to it, such as poverty and trauma, and put participants on a path that leads away from violence. Second are intervention programs, which reduce violence in the near term by actively intervening in conflicts, avoiding escalation and retaliation, and breaking the cycle of violence. Third are response programs, which provide non-medical help after an incident to stabilize victims and families. And fourth is, of course, law enforcement, which deters violence and solves crimes to get perpetrators off of the streets. We'd also group prosecution in as a component of effective law enforcement. Traditionally, there's been a lot of focus on that law enforcement piece. However, one thing we heard over and over from police chiefs and prosecutors is that we're not going to arrest our way out of gun violence. Those other 3 components are also needed. We found that national research supports this programmatic 4-pronged strategy. I don't have time this morning to cover all the programs, so I do want to give you a couple of highlights. On this slide, I'll highlight intensive mentorship-based programs at the top. These enroll participants who've been identified as high risk due to their behavior or criminal justice involvement or involvement in a violent crime incident. These programs employ mentors to provide guidance, work to change participants' thinking and behaviors, and provide them with the tools to succeed academically and in the workforce. Good examples of these include Roanoke's Youth and Gang Prevention Program, the Broken Men Foundation here in Richmond, and the Hopeful Hampton Program in Hampton City. For intervention, I'll highlight the violence interrupter work at the top. These programs use credible messengers who are people known and trusted in the community to directly engage with people involved in disputes. They look to mediate those disputes and keep them from escalating to stop retaliation. Good examples of these include Community First in Norfolk, Victor in Newport News, and Real Life in Hopewell, Petersburg, and Richmond. And my apologies for mispronouncing Norfolk. I'd also highlight the hospital-based programs at the bottom, with a program down the block at VCU being the gold standard in Virginia. Once someone is shot and in the hospital, there's a great opportunity to connect with them and to help divert them down a better path that keeps them from being shot again or retaliating and shooting someone else. HVIPs make those connections with patients and provide them with the support they need to change their behaviors. They also help guide them through the healthcare system, for example, making sure they get the follow-up care that they need. For response programs, I'll highlight stabilization and case management. These programs provide victims and families with support after an incident. For example, if someone's house is shot up, they might not feel comfortable going back there. So these programs will do things like provide temporary or permanent housing. For example, Portsmouth United coordinates stabilization services in that city, and an organization called Fed Up in Roanoke provides support to grieving families there. Looking at law enforcement, there are a number of things they're doing to improve how they deter and respond to gun violence. I'd highlight use of new technologies, which several chiefs said were critical for helping them quickly solve crimes, especially in understaffed departments. I'd also highlight community engagement, because gaining community trust is essential for both preventing and solving violent crime. Now, taken as a whole, research found the types of programs that I've been highlighting are effective at reducing gun violence when they are properly designed and implemented. We have a few examples of that on this slide, and we have a lot more evidence on each of these programs in our report. We found that many of these programs are already being implemented in Virginia, and I gave you a few examples already. However, in a lot of cases, some of these are relatively new, and there's still gaps in programs and the communities that are being served. For example, while a lot of localities have a violence interrupter program, some do not, and even the ones that do have them, those programs might not be in all the higher gun violence neighborhoods.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, question on the violence interrupter programs and some of the community-based. You mentioned a bunch of programs, and a lot of the folks providing them didn't sound like they were government agencies. They were local nonprofits, it sounds like, and some other community-based groups. How much of that is being operated with taxpayer funds and how much of it is being done without state support? And do you have any concept, or you guys look at all about the return on investment? In other words, for a little bit of seed money for a group like that, we get a big return versus, something that's all state money, for instance, with law enforcement, or all public money with law enforcement.
Delegate Simon, you're right. The implementation of these programs, it's being done by a variety of partners. In some cases, it's the city, it's a city department or a city office. In a lot of cases, it's a community-based organization, a nonprofit. Hospitals are obviously being run on the hospital programs. In terms of the funding, I wish I could paint a total picture, but there's so many partners and we couldn't even identify all of them, and some localities are actually actively trying to do that to see where their gaps are. But the shorter answer is that the state's providing a lot of funding that is flowing to both the local cities as well as to some of these CBOs. The federal government has been providing funding, but some of that is drying up. For example, that Victor program in Newport News was federally funded. And now that funding is disappearing. And a lot of these organizations are paying for it out of pocket. So they're raising whatever funds they can through whatever avenues they can. In some cases, the people feel so passionately about this work that they might have a business over here and they're using some of their profits they get from their business, their income, to finance these operations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. A question about, on slide 38, the new technologies to allow for better, faster, and more effective response in investigations. Can you give an example of some of those new technologies?
Yes, Delegate. I think one of the ones that came up were things like LPRs and real-time crime centers. So if there's something that's happening, that they can quickly figure out there's a car leaving, this is the car, there's a real-time crime center that's then coordinating the response to find that car right after an incident and shooting has happened. So instead of taking a couple of days to figure out, who did it and to track that vehicle down, they can do that in almost real time.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I don't see any more hands up. Good job. This is a big challenge for everybody.
Mr. Chair, we do have one more section, but
oh, okay.
I can skip past it if you would like.
No. Go ahead. We're on the edge of our seat.
So this is just looking at state and local roles. I could tell you a lot more about the local role, but essentially all these programs are being implemented at the local level. And so it's important that you have local leadership over that, and we're seeing that in these higher gun violence localities, there's these offices being established oftentimes with state funding to provide that local leadership role. And so that's really critical to making sure that all these programs are in place, that gaps are identified, and things are being implemented effectively. So I don't want to undersell the role of the locals here. But looking at the state also has an important role in supporting all these local efforts and established 3 funding programs to do that. I'm not sure how familiar you are with those, but I can get into them if you want to know more about them. The state has also established the DCGS Office of Safer Communities, which performs 2 key functions. One, it administers the 3 funding programs, and it also provides technical assistance and support to all localities and CBOs statewide, not just grantees in their gun violence reduction efforts.
To mark on the 3 programs that you've listed here that we help fund, do you have evidence-based results here that we know we're spending in the right areas? I know there's some debate, I've seen it, debate between do we put so much in this, so much in that? Do you have any definitive recommendations on that?
Mr. Chair, we don't have any recommendations on how much funding should be in each program. We do talk a little bit about safer communities here in a second. I will say that all these programs are important and they're all sort of serving a niche. So safer communities is directing money, larger amounts of money towards the high gun violence communities or high gun violence localities. FVIP, that's where the money for all the hospital programs comes from. And there's also grant money that can go out to any community-based organizations and local governments in any locality in the Commonwealth. And even though we're focused on the higher gun violence localities, that doesn't mean that other localities don't have their own issues that need to be addressed. Operation Ceasefire is directed.
They're all good. They're all good. All right, got it.
We found that state support to address gun violence has increased, but some localities aren't receiving as a relatively less state funding in the higher gun violence localities. and you know this, Mr. Chair, this is just showing that the appropriations that the General Assembly has put in towards these efforts has gone up significantly over the past couple biennia. When you look at how that money gets distributed, focusing on those 9 higher gun violence communities, you can see that the 4 that are in safer communities are getting substantially more, both in terms of total dollars and dollars per resident, than the other 5, even though that those have similar needs and are engaged in similar efforts. So we kind of point out here that those other localities could benefit. Again, run through all the benefits there, but essentially, expanding to those other localities could be beneficial. But to your point, Mr. Chair, at this point, we don't have a full evaluation of the effectiveness of safer communities. DCJS is working on that, so they have irons in the fire, so to speak, but we won't really know until probably 2026 for an initial full assessment. But even then, as the data comes in, it might take longer to really understand that program.
DCJS has a longitudinal study underway of these various approaches.
Mr. Chair, they're working with VCU, and VCU is doing a lot of work to collect information from localities, and both quantitative and qualitative, to see how those programs are working, or the program is working. Mr. Chair, so the option we have here is that I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
No, I think Senator Eben had a question.
This may not be one you can answer, I'm not sure, but I noticed this morning on my way down to Richmond, a billboard by 95 touting our reduction in gun violence. And I was just wondering if we know who's sponsoring that.
Senator, I'm not sure. I know that the Office of the Attorney General has a media campaign that's been going on, so it could be through their work. And then also we have the recently established Office of Gun Violence Prevention in Richmond. I'm not sure if they might have been involved. I couldn't tell you for sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, we have a policy option to consider. If the General Assembly wants to expand safer communities to those additional localities, you could wait until DCJS finishes its evaluation, or you could proceed on the current evidence. The current evidence is that those local offices that this helps create are doing a valuable role, and that the types of programs that this funds can be effective at reducing gun violence if they are implemented properly.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I know we're short on time. Just the last finding here is related to some technical work that could be done to improve those 3 programs, and we have a couple of recommendations to that effect.
Okay. Did you get any feedback from DCJS on any of this?
Yes, Mr. Chair. They gave us thumbs up.
Thumbs up. All right. Good.
Oh, Mr. Chair, if you'll indulge me, my apologies. Sure. I didn't mean to skip over this one. This is an important technical change for safer communities. Right now, basically, the locality gets that money, and they have a year or less to spend it, depending on if the budget makes it out on time. So what's been happening is that makes it hard for them to plan, hard for them to implement programs. So this would just basically put the safer communities funding on a 2-year biennial cycle that would give localities a little extra time to spend that money. And this was really important to the folks who were involved.
So a couple of them had trouble spending their appropriation in the first year.
In the first year, basically none of the money could be spent. A lot of that was first-year startups. In the second year, almost all the money was spent, but both the local offices as well as the programs that get the funding said that 1-year window really creates some challenges, and if they had an additional time, they could make better use of that fund.
So the communities that have this ongoing shouldn't have a problem gearing up, but if we added the 5 other cities that you're recommending, they may have some startup time, maybe.
Yes, Mr. Chair, but I think even for the localities that get it, it's important for them to go from 1 year to 2 years so they can plan it out. If you look at budget cycles, they're usually 2 years. Grant cycles are usually 2 to 3 years.
Okay. Okay, good suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Well, Kimberly, now you know we're already at 12:01, and we bring you. This is bad, I know for you.
We completely understand, Mr. Chair, and we believe we can get this from 30 minutes down to 10 minutes. Do you have 10 minutes?
All right.
We can try and even move through more quickly. The rest of today's meeting is dedicated to the Virginia retirement system. Alex Jansen is going to provide you an abbreviated presentation on a study we conducted of VRS hybrid plan employee contributions.
Sure.
And Mr. Chairman, we conducted this study under our existing Oversight Authority, and there are several reasons that we conducted the study at this time in particular. First, the hybrid plan has been in place for around 10 years now, and the majority of active VRS members are now hybrid plan members. And there has been some interest among some members of the General Assembly in potentially modifying the plan. So we thought it made sense to do kind of a pulse check and see what the plan is doing and if it's still doing what we thought it was meant to do. I do want to thank VRS staff, in particular their staff actuaries, because they did run numerous potential plan changes for us to see how the income replacement could change under different potential changes and also what the cost would be. So after Alex's presentation, Trish Bishop, the VRS director, will get up to give you kind of a brief response on the report. And then we are going to drop that last presentation on the agenda today, which is our December oversight report on VRS. I can just give you the upshot right now. It's good news. Basically, the trust fund achieved a 10.3% investment return over the 1-year period ending September 30th, and the assets in the fund are now $127 billion. The trust fund is meeting, the investments in the trust fund are meeting their benchmarks, meeting or exceeding the benchmarks for all but the 3-year period. Based on the latest actuarial valuation, employer contribution rates are going down, which is a good thing, and the funded status of the plans are going up, which is a good thing as well. Alex?
Terrific. Welcome, Ms. Jansen. Congratulations on those results there. Pretty good. Charles Schultz would be.
I was happy to sit in those meetings, Mr. Chair.
I know.
Okay, I have just had a sip of caffeine, so hopefully I can go even quicker. But I am Alex Jansen, and I am going to go through our abbreviated review of hybrid retirement plan employee contributions. In the interest of time, as Kimberly mentioned, I'm just going to go through some key slides, and I won't plan to stop for any pauses for questions, but please feel free to stop me as you have them.
Okay.
At a high level, the hybrid plan reduces employer costs and transfers some risk to employees. And the hybrid plan, as it is structured under current law, is sufficient to let most career employees receive adequate pre-retirement income replacement. However, we found a couple of areas where VRS could increase outreach and education to encourage additional contributions for hybrid plan members. And finally, we reviewed, and I'll just go through very briefly, a few common plan design features in other public plan retirement systems and what the impact would be here in Virginia. How's that? As you may know, there are different types of public retirement plans. The most common is a defined benefit or DB plan, which is a traditional pension plan like Plan 1 or Plan 2. There are also defined contribution plans, similar to 401ks prevalent in the private sector. And then there are hybrid retirement plans, which combine elements of both DB and DC plans to share the risk between employer and employees. These plans typically have a lower DB benefit, which helps reduce employer costs. About a quarter of states have now adopted a hybrid plan as the default plan or the only option for their general state employees. And I want to note that a generally accepted adequate pre-retirement replacement income is 80%. So just bear that in mind as we go through. All right. So Virginia's hybrid plan, I will just do a quick refresher for everyone, which is the plan for most employees hired on or after January 1st, 2014, is a combined DB-DC plan where both employees and employers make mandatory contributions. Employees must contribute 5% of their salary across both components, and employers pay an actuarially determined rate to the DB component and an additional 1% to the DC component. Hybrid plan members can make additional voluntary contributions up to 4% for a total of 9% contribution and can change those elections monthly. Employers will match the voluntary contributions for that 4% fully for the first 1% and then half for the next 3% for an additional 2.5 contributions for employer matching. For members who do not contribute the maximum 4%, they are auto-escalated for voluntary contributions by 0.5% once every 3 years unless a member opts out. So under the plan as it is designed under current law, it will take an employee approximately 24 years to be able to be contributing the maximum 4%. The hybrid plan did reduce employer costs in comparison to Plan 2 by first reducing the DB benefit. Hybrid plan members also pay a larger portion of their annual benefit cost compared to legacy plan members. And finally, almost 75% of hybrid plan members are not contributing the full amount for the maximum employer match, which also reduces employer costs. In addition to paying a higher proportion of that annual benefit cost, hybrid plan employees also pay more for their benefit generally. In order to receive a benefit comparable to a Plan 2 member, a hybrid plan member must pay 7% annually throughout their career compared to 5% for a Plan 2 member. Right. And so, as you heard on my first slide, what we found is that as it is currently structured, the hybrid retirement plan does allow most career employees to achieve an estimated 80% income replacement in retirement when combined with Social Security. Hybrid plan members could save more, but the power of inertia and default options are strong, and so most members do not actively choose to save more. There are some underlying assumptions for how we got to the income replacements that you'll see throughout this, and those are in an appendix in the slide and also in the report, so I will leave those for your review. But the bottom line here again is that the current plan allows most career employees to meet the generally accepted adequate income replacement ratio. This is still less than an identical Plan 2 member who would receive an estimated 84% income replacement. If hybrid members contributed at a higher rate from the start, their income replacement would be higher. However, only 1/3 of hybrid plan members actively have chosen a higher rate. Most are staying with that default, with that escalation. And this is common across retirement plan research. Most employees stay with the default options. VRS does do some outreach to members, but we found some specific things that VRS could do to increase contributions and encourage that, encourage increased contributions. So we have a couple of recommendations on things that VRS could do, which I will move past in the interest of time, but are particularly an online training course and some targeted outreach. One more. We also looked at some common features of other plans and asked VRS to model what the impact would be if implemented here in Virginia. The potential plan changes that I will walk us through could all help increase income replacement, but would also increase state costs. I want to note that we looked in each of these at changing one plan design feature at a time and keeping everything else static. So the first that we looked at was auto enrollment. So Virginia currently enrolls new hybrid plan members at 0% voluntary contribution. In our potential plan change, we looked at enrolling members at either a 0.5% or a 1% voluntary contribution and keeping that escalation and matching pattern the same. With this change, the income replacement increases by an estimated 2 to 4%. Next, we looked at auto escalation. So Virginia's auto escalation pattern is unusually slow. So for our potential plan change, we looked at escalating new members at either 0.5% annually or 1% annually until they reach that 4% maximum. And this would increase the income replacement by an estimated 6 to 7%. A final potential plan change modeled was changing the employee's mandatory contribution split from 4% to the DB component and 1% to the DC component to now 3% to the DB component and 2% to the DC component. So in this change, the employer would pick up the additional 1% that the employees had been giving into the DB component. With this, the income replacement would increase by an estimated 4%. And you'll notice there were numbers on those slides for what the estimated cost increases would be, and I did not go through those, but I will mention now, those are for individual state plan members. We did not calculate an overall cost impact for any of the potential plan changes, but employer costs would increase. And so for context, if all current state plan hybrid members were contributing the maximum 4% for that employer match, the state would face an increase of approximately $40 million, which would only be compounded when expanded to hybrid members of the teachers and political subdivision plans. Another consideration is the remaining unfunded liability for the DB plans. So any potential plan change by increasing employer costs could make it harder for employers to pay down those unfunded liabilities, particularly in unfavorable market conditions. And finally, Mr. Chair, I think we're doing pretty good. Virginia's hybrid plan on that main hybrid account has a cap of 4% for voluntary contributions, which may be making it harder for members to make additional contributions. Members can make additional contributions up to the IRS limit, but in a separate account. Regardless of the contribution amount that members are giving, hybrid members see 4 accounts when they log in, 2 contributory and 2 mandatory employer match, which can be confusing. An additional challenge is that the contribution approach for those 2 accounts are different. So one is percentage-based and one is flat dollar-based. And so determining allowable contributions may require some additional math on the member's part, which my high school calculus teacher would love, but maybe not everybody. In other states, voluntary contributions are put in one account that goes up to the IRS annual limit. And so to make it easier for hybrid members to contribute additional funds where they are able to do so, the General Assembly may wish to consider increasing the contribution limit for that main hybrid retirement account, the hybrid 457, to the IRS annual contribution limit. And with that, Mr. Chair.
Anybody have any questions for Ms. Jansen? Hang around, and maybe we will after Ms. Bishop responds.
Absolutely.
To this. Come on down. Congratulations on last year's results.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the commission, for this opportunity to respond. Credit goes to our investment department. They're an excellent crew headed by Andrew Junkin, who's here with us in the back. I will not spend a lot of time on my response. I'll try to hit just some high-level points. First, we want to thank the JLARC staff for their ongoing collaboration as they carry out their oversight duties, especially Alex and Kimberly for their work on this report. I think it's fair to say that the hybrid retirement plan really dramatically changed public employee retirement benefits in Virginia when it debuted back in 2014. Over time, and as noted in this report, hybrid plan members bear a higher contribution burden to achieve benefits similar to the traditional defined benefit pension, and they also have to proactively save. We have done award-winning communication campaigns, including our Smart Step tool that allows them to increase their savings annually and take quicker advantage of the employer match. We provide calculators, financial planning services, and professional investment advice to help our members plan effectively for retirement. In fact, these nudges sort of along the way, about a third of our employees and participants are taking action on their own, but obviously that's not enough. And so one of the things we agree with is that no matter how much robust education and outreach we do, automatic features are simply more effective. So things like auto-enrollment, as Alex mentioned, auto-escalation more frequently, also are really effective in moving folks through the continuum.
Are there any
more.
recommendations that Alex made that you disagree with?
No, I think we can handle most of them. I think there's a few things that we've talked about with the team about needing time for implementation. We have 850 employers, and so they'll need time. Anything that does have a budgetary impact, because if we auto-enroll or we auto-escalate more frequently, there are associated employer costs for that. As Alex mentioned, it's about 0.6% if everybody hybrid payroll, if everyone moved to the maximum on an auto enrollment. But there are different ways that could be approached or phased in, and we're certainly available to do different scenarios and analyses to look at the costs of those changes that might be made. I think on some of the opportunities to make some changes on the website, some of that will take a little time and some doing, and we also offer it already within different formats, and so just trying to think about the cost-benefit analysis of that. But overall, we concur with most of the recommendations. I think our strongest concurrence, and Alex and Kimberly have heard me say this before, is that really automatic features work. When we auto-escalate people, we have about a 1% opt-out rate. So that's a good news story. So I think that's probably would conclude my prepared remarks, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Anybody have a question here? Okay, I think this is something that all of our employees need to look at very closely. And every financial advisor you ever had is a maximum max out your 401ks before you invest in anything else. And we're not, a lot of our employees aren't doing that. And it has long-term implications, so, for, everybody. So maybe some of these automatic escalation things we should consider. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission.
Thank you. Mr. Greer, you want to sum up here?
Everybody will be pleased to hear, Mr. Chairman, that concludes our agenda and our meetings for 2025. I do want to thank you for your leadership and support over the last 2 years and your role as chair. Thank Delegate Simon for your leadership of the topic selection over the last 2 years. And then thank all of you for your attention and support of the staff and our work over this year.
You all do a great job. I hope all your staff has happy holidays and you give them a nice bowl of chocolates or something.
I thought you were going to say a bonus, but no.
But if you have bonuses, that'd be good too. What's ever allowed under law.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.